Okay. I called this the overview of the feast. I just want to look at all of them real briefly and let you write down some of the things about each of them. And not just the 7 feasts that we'll be looking at, but 2 other holidays, and then, of course, Sabbath, which is it's like a celebration and like a feast in a sense. So that's the very first one. Roman numeral 1 is the Sabbath. And for the Jewish people, Sabbath begins at dusk on Friday night and goes through dusk on Saturday. Typically, most Jews don't do any work, but the whole point is let me get the wording right. No regular work should be done. So if there's some kind of an emergency or possibly even some getting food together or things like that, those things would be okay. But for the most part, they don't do any work. In fact, some of them will not even turn on a light switch or any electrical appliances during the Sabbath. They don't travel. It's often dedicated to family and friends and sharing meals, attending the synagogue, maybe going for a walk together. All of the preparations for Sabbath would begin Friday beforehand. Okay, so they would prepare the meals for that day and have it all ready to go. And then they also, right before nightfall, they will light 2, it's called Shabbat, but 2 Shabbat candles, and those would then burn all day during the Sabbath. They have a special prayer called I do not pronounce things properly, okay? But I will do my best. It's called the Kabbalat Shabbat, and the Kiddush is recited. That's a blessing for the wine and blessing for different things. They eat challah bread, which is a braided yeast kind of bread. And then they end with the Havdalah ceremony, which involves lighting a double-wick candle and blessing the wine, inhaling the smell of herbs and spices, and that starts the beginning of a new week. Okay? So there's a lot of things that go on, not just the fact that they don't do work. I mean, there's a whole ceremony, and when they go to the synagogue, there is a whole list of things that they do there. I'm probably not going to go into detail on it. Any of these things, I believe it's also listed in there, but there is a guidebook, especially for Passover. It's called the Haggadah. And if I remember right, it's got the Sabbath in there as well, but it goes through step by step what you do during the Passover celebration. So that's number 1. That's their Sabbath, what we would call Sunday now, or what we would worship on Sunday, they would worship on Saturday. And I told y'all last week that the early Christian church, first century church, they were still Jews, the vast majority of them, and they worshiped on Saturday, just like everyone else, just like the Jews. But it changed. I think it was around 300 or 400 A.D. There got to be a lot of what do I word? There's separation between the Jewish people and the Christian church, and the Jewish people were being persecuted, and so the Christian church also did this to kind of separate themselves, and they started meeting on Sundays. I think really a lot of the times, of course, if you look in Acts, it says that they met daily. And then I think it became a custom to doing it on Sunday because that's when the resurrection happened, as well as it's the first day of the week. And we're supposed to bring our first fruits, the first of everything, to God. And so I don't have a problem at all doing the first day. And I think that's a good thing to do. And the fact that that was when Jesus rose from the dead. Now, a lot of this stuff, there was a guy, he's a Seventh-day Adventist. And the first time I heard a lot of this was on Sunday morning, on my way, when I lived in Eufaula, on my way to church every Sunday morning, he would be on the radio, and I'd listen to him, and he was very knowledgeable about a lot of things. And when we get to talking about first fruits, I will explain this a little bit more. But they believe in worshiping on Saturday, okay? So, Roman numeral 2 is the spring feasts. There are 4 spring feasts. And I believe that all of these were fulfilled in the first coming of Jesus, when Jesus lived here on earth. The first of those is Passover, also called Pesach or Pesach. It's not really a K, it's like more of a guttural sound from what I've heard. And this became kind of the foundational feast, more than any of the others. This was the feast. It happens on the 14th day of the month of Nisan, which is March and April. Remember, it's a lunar month, and so it'll be, I think it's like so many days after the first new moon in April, or March or April. That's why it moves back and forth. This is also why we celebrate Easter when we celebrate Easter, because we do Easter along with Passover. And so it changes because of the lunar month. For the Jewish people, this would represent or commemorate the Passover, when the angel of death passed over in the Exodus time period, when they were in bondage in Egypt, and they were told to kill a lamb, roast it, eat it. If they didn't have enough people eat it, they burn anything was left over. You did not keep it. Originally, this was before they made it into the Promised Land, that 40 years and all, it was to be eaten standing up with your cloak on, with your staff in your hand, ready to go. And because they were, this was a celebration of being freed, and the death angel passing over them. When they got into the Promised Land, now they're in the Promised Land, so now everyone's supposed to bring a pillow, and you sit on a pillow. By the way, hopefully I will remember to tell you that. We're looking at doing Passover on April 1st, which is the first day of the Passover and Feast of Unleavened Bread. So that's a Wednesday, so it worked out just perfectly. But we're going to have our own meal back there in Fellowship Hall. Invite the whole church, but I'll try to tell them, some things. The Jewish Christians that I've talked to before, they said just don't bring shellfish or pork. I mean, there's nothing wrong with eating them, but at this particular celebration, we probably shouldn't. Should probably keep it kosher, all right? So if any of you are adventurous and you want to get online and find some good Passover recipes, you can do that. We did it here several years ago, but I'd done it at Kingsgate Christian School when I taught there, and one of the parents made some matzo ball soup. And it was really good. So, if you want to do that. This also represents Jesus being our Passover lamb and paying the price so that we could have forgiveness. And that's why we celebrate Easter at that time period. Yes, sir.
Could you bring Ezekiel bread?
As far as I know. You know how to make that?
How do you buy it?
Oh, okay. I've seen the recipe, and there's not a whole lot to it. But yeah, that'd be fine. The second of those is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And it begins the day after Passover, and it goes for 7 days. And they are to eat bread without yeast. This also comes from the wilderness wanderings, because when they left Egypt, they left in a hurry, and they didn't have time to, because they did sourdough bread back then. They didn't have time to let the bread rise, and so the bread was flat. Not exactly like our little cracker things that we use for the Lord's Supper, but and I will probably just buy matzah at the store, even though it says on there this is not kosher, should not be used. You should bake your own. If somebody wants to bake some, we'll let it. It usually is a little thicker than the matzah that I buy. But you're to do it without yeast. Probably have to put some holes in it and stuff that way to keep it from being one big bubble in the middle or something that way. So during this celebration, one of the first things they would do is the woman, would go through the house and completely clean out everything. This was a good time for spring cleaning anyway, but they would clean everything and make sure there was no yeast anywhere except for one spot. And if she was nice, she would leave that one spot the same every year so that the husband would know where it was. And the husband and the kids, they would go and they would search around it. They'd find it. They'd take a wooden spoon and like a paper napkin and a feather. And they would sweep the crumbs up, the yeast up with the feather into the wooden spoon, set it in the paper, fold it all up, and take it outside, and they'd have a big, not really a bonfire, but they'd have a fire, community-wide, would have a big fire, and everyone would burn their spoon and the yeast. And, that way they cleansed the house, they cleansed it from all yeast, and then the husband would declare it cleaned, and then they go around the rest of the stuff. This leaven, remember, represents sin. And not only is this about the wilderness wanderings, but it is also pointing to the Lord's death, the fact that sin did not cause his body to be decayed or anything that way. And then the third one is the Feast of First Fruits. And this is the Sabbath that occurs during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Remember, Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, it's all done by the moon, so it can start any day during the week. But when it starts, like this year, it would start on Wednesday, then the Saturday evening, right after the sun goes down, that would be the Feast of First Fruits. And the Feast of First Fruits, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but they do find, they study their crops and they study everything and they find out the very best of everything, and they'll put a little ribbon on it or something, some way to mark it. And then as soon as the sun goes down, then they cut that off and they, thresh out the wheat and make the bread and stuff and all of that. But it represents, it's a celebration of the wheat. Let me see, make sure it's white wheat. Anyway, the first harvest. But then it also, for Christians, it would represent the resurrection of Jesus. And this, I'm not going to get into it because I'll get too much. In 1 Corinthians 15, it says, "But Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep." So it gives us the promise that not only Jesus rose from the dead, but also that he was our first fruits. So we also have that promise that we will rise from the dead. And then the fourth one is called the Feast of Weeks. It's also called Pentecost, or it became known as Pentecost. Penta means 5, and the Feast of Weeks started 49 days after the Feast of First Fruits. So it would start on a Saturday night, as soon as so it would, technically they would say it would start Sunday of the 50th week. This is also when the Spirit descended upon the early church, and the church really began at that point. So another reason that Sunday is a good time to celebrate. Okay. I'll come back to this in a second. In Ephesians it says, "For he himself is our peace, who has made the two one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by abolishing in his flesh the law with its commandments and regulations. His purpose was to create in himself one new man out of the two, thus making peace." In this celebration, they would make 2 loaves of bread. They would both have yeast in it, by the way. This is not the unleavened bread. But it represents the union of the Jews and the Gentiles. And, of course, that's when the church began. And it also has yeast in it, which yeast represents what? Sin. Because we as the church, we're still sinful, right? And so are the Jews. This one, let me see. Yeah. That's all I have on that one. Questions about any of those 4? He said, I don't want to get into a lot of detail on them yet, because we're going to go through each and every one of these a little bit later. Point number 3 are the fall feast. And I believe that these will be fulfilled in Jesus' second coming, when he comes again. The first of those is the Feast of Trumpets. It's also called Rosh Hashanah. Charlie, you asked about Rosh Hashanah, right, last week? That's the Feast of Trumpets. It is the beginning of the civil year. That's when it happens. And it's going to be September, October time period. Again, it's at the, it is at the new moon when only the slightest crescent is visible. That's the day it starts. And they have multiple witnesses that are used to make sure they get it on the exact right date and don't miss it. It is a two-day holiday celebrating the beginning of the year, and is in New Testament time is probably the second most solemn festival. The interval between the Feast of Trumpets, between Pentecost and the Feast of Trumpets represent the present age, and between the Feast of Trumpets and the Yom Kippur it's called the Days of Awe, A-W-E. Trumpets will signify Jesus' return to judge the wicked, to bring the church age to an end. By the way, there are 2 types of trumpets they use. One was a long, straight metal trumpet, kind of like the herald trumpets. You've ever seen those in like kings and stuff would have. And then there's the shofar, which is a ram's horn. I have a very small shofar. It's curved and it's about this long. I should have brought it in here. Some of them are made from goat's horns and they're kind of curled, but they might be, as long as this. But I don't have one of those. And there's different kinds of things that they do. You play it kind of like a trumpet, but there's different sounds that they make for different things. During those days of awe, I told you the Feast of Trumpets begins this. It is a very solemn time. It's a time for very serious introspection. Jewish people think that there are 3 books that are open. The book of life is open, and it has those people who are definitely going to heaven. And the book of the unrighteous, which are those that are going to hell but are probably going to die during the year. And then the biggest book is the book of the in-betweens. Not perfect, but not lost. And that book, it gives them this time period, this 10, 15 days, whatever, I think it's 10 days, to make amends for anything that they did wrong during the year. And so that is a time that they will give a lot of money to charities, and they will help people out, and they'll do nice things, because they want to make sure that their good works are more than their bad works, because that's how they believe that they're getting into heaven. And then the next one is the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur. And it's called the Day of Covering, the Great Day, or just the day. If they say something about the day, they're talking about Yom Kippur. It's 9 days after the Feast of Trumpets, so there was, I guess, 8 days in between the two. During the Old Testament, this was the one day a year that the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies. There's an elaborate ceremony that he has to go through. I'll share it with you when we get there, but it's like they change clothes and they do this, and then they change clothes, and then they bathe and change clothes and do this, and they change clothes. It's a really long, drawn-out thing. But they'll take the blood of the sacrificial lamb. He will take it into the Holy of Holies and sprinkle it on the mercy seat. Now, in 71 AD, the temple was destroyed, and so they no longer have the mercy seat. And mercy seat was gone before that, the Ark of the Covenant. But they no longer have that, so there's a lot of other things that they do now. And I remember one of them has to do with a chicken, but I don't remember what it was. So when I get to that point, we'll get it. And then the last one is the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths. And this one is also basically known as the feast. It is a big time of rejoicing. 7 days, and it commemorates the Exodus. I told you they'll build these booths, and they'll sometimes have just branches or boards laid across, and if it rains, you get wet. The whole point of this now, the main reference, or whatever word I've got there, has to do with studying of the Word. They will stay up, well, probably the first night they'll stay up all night, but they do a lot of studying of the Word. And these inside these temporary houses or huts or booths, tabernacles, whatever you want to call it. And then also the high priest will lead a procession to the pool of Siloam, fill a pitcher of water that goes back a different way, and this is to invoke God's blessing for the latter rains, or the early rains. Sorry, the early rains are in October, the latter ones are in March. And for us, this represents the Messianic kingdom, the 1,000-year reign of Christ here on earth. Okay? Questions about any of the fall feast? We're going to start with the fall feast because I think Passover is going to take us around 3-4 weeks to do, and I would like to get it finished right before we actually participate. 2 other holidays I want to mention. One of them is Hanukkah. So that's Roman numeral 4 is the other holidays, and first one of those is Hanukkah. And of course, this is during December. It means a time of consecration, but it celebrates the rededication of the temple after the Maccabean revolt. How many of you have ever heard of the Maccabean revolt, or the Maccabees? Judas Maccabeus led a revolt against Rome in, sometime between 400 BC and when Jesus came. I don't remember exactly. But they freed the temple, and they started up things in the temple again, which they hadn't been able to do for a while. Here it is, 167 BC. It said, it also, during this time, there was a menorah in the temple that had been burning, and they had just, one container of the oil, and it kept that candle burning for 8 days. And normally have to refill it every single day, but this one container lasted the whole 8 days. And so that's the other, sometimes called the, yes, I don't want to say that because I think that's wrong. I know there's a Feast of Lights, and that might be part of this too. They will light candles. They have the menorah. I told you I got one that has 3 on each side and 1 in the middle. The Hanukkah one has 4 on either side and 1 in the middle. It's an 8th-day feast. They start with the one in the middle lit, and then each day they will light, this side, move until they have all 8 of the others lit. There's a little 4-sided top called a dreidel, and they spin it. The kids do this. This stands for a great miracle happened here. It's Nun, Gimel, High, and Shin. And I heard that the kids say Nun because you don't get anything. Gimel is give me, so you take everything. And I don't remember the other two, but anyway, they do that. And then finally, the last one is Purim, and it's celebrating the story of Queen Esther, and they will read that, the whole book of Esther. They will read it during their celebration, and it says that they wear colorful costumes and have a joyful party. Anytime they're reading along and they recite the name Haman, the members of the congregation shake rattles and to drown out the name in their noise. So anytime they'd say Haman, they'd have rattles and they'd do stuff to make noise so you couldn't hear his name. Yep. Questions? Okay, next week we're going to start with the Feast of Trumpets, which is the first of the fall feast. And we'll do those 3 and then go back to Passover, okay? And I'll try to have this thing like this printed out for you so you can keep up with it. If any of you want my printout, I've got 2 of them here and 1 back there. So if you want them, you're welcome to them because I have them on the computer. Okay, let's stand and we'll sing. Oh, we do have your contribution statements back there in the back if you want to go ahead and grab them. And we'll make a semicircle